Welcome to Roots and Realities, the show where ancient wisdom and modern life meet. I'm your host, Manu Nellutla. At Roots and Realities, we don't just look at the past, we put it on a trial. We question the timelines, we challenge the comfortable assumptions, and we search for the original operating systems that have guided human society for the millennia. Today, we journey back not just a few centuries, but to the very edge of the last ice age, to the dawn of our collective memory. We are going to a time older than the pyramids, older than Stonehenge, older than the epic tales of the Mahabharata. We are heading to a place that has been called the oldest known temple complex in the world, Gobekli Tepe. Found in modern day Turkey, this site is more than just an archaeological wonder. It's an archaeological anarchist. It's a fact that refuses to fit the story we have told ourselves about the human progress. For over a century, that story was simple, linear, and reassuring. It went like this. First, humans were hunting with stones, arrows, and spears. Then they invented agriculture. Later, with full bellies, they settled down. First, they built villages, then cities, and only then, with all the bricks and mortar of civilization in place, did they have the luxury to look up at the heavens and build temples, to create art, and to invent gods. Well, Gobekli Tepe takes that neat, orderly timeline and shatters it into a million pieces. It suggests the opposite happened. It whispers a radical, unsettling idea across 12,000 years. What if humans weren't driven by the need for bread, but by the hunger for meaning? What if the first great human project wasn't a farm, but a temple? Let's dig in. For decades, the hill near Sanliurfa in southeastern Turkey was known as Gobekli Tepe or Potbelly Hill. Archaeologists had noted it before, but the prevailing wisdom dismissed it as anything important. The stone and flint flakes and the limestone slabs found on the surface were believed to be the remains of a long abandoned medieval cemetery. It was a place of the dead, but from a much more recent past, is what the prevailing thought was. No one thought to dig deeper. But that all changed in 1994. A Kurdish shepherd named Savak Ildiz, navigating his flock across the dusty hill, noticed several large, strangely shaped limestone pillars sticking out of the ground. This wasn't the first time he had seen them, but on this occasion, the significance of what lay beneath finally began to surface. The report reached the ears of a German archaeologist from the German Archaeological Society, Klaus Schmidt. When Smith visited the site, he recognized something that others missed. The stones weren't medieval grave markers. They were something far older, something that reminded him of other prehistoric sites. He knew almost instantly that he had a choice: walk away and leave the discovery for another generation, or dedicate the rest of his life to uncovering this particular hill. Luckily for us, he chose to dig. What he and his team slowly, painstakingly unearthed was a revelation that sent shockwaves through the world of archaeology. Massive T-shaped megaliths arranged in elegant circular formations. Some were weighing up to 10 tons, standing taller than a giraffe. They were covered in intricate, masterfully carved reliefs of animals, venomous snakes, powerful boars, cunning foxes, and foreboding vultures. This was not just an ordinary cemetery. This was a gallery of prehistoric art, a monumental center of immense power. And then came the dating. Using radiocarbon methods on organic materials found at the site, The team dated the earliest layers to up to 9600 BCE, over 12,000 years ago. Now, let me put that in perspective for you. This site was built 7,000 years before the Stonehenge. It predates the currently acknowledged timeline even for the Great Pyramid of Giza by more than 6,000 years. This was a time when most of the world was assumed to be populated by small, nomadic bands of hunter gatherers. And that was the paradigm breaking fact. This monumental construction project, which would have recruited and required hundreds of laborers working together for years, was accomplished before the known dates of invention of farming. As per the current archaeological and historical timelines, the people who built Gobekli Tepe should not have domesticated animals. They should not have pottery. They should not have metal tools too. And yet, Gobekli Tepe shows that they had a system of belief and a system of organization so sophisticated that it was enough to create this kind of a monument. The standard narrative of most of our civilization had crashed. The theory that ritual and religion are a luxury of settled societies was proven wrong. Gobekli Tepe inverted that timeline. He presented a new radical hypothesis that shared cosmology, the very act of coming together to build something sacred. This was the first true system that organized humanity on a larger scale. It wasn't economics that came first. It was the understanding of the true meaning of our existence. And this changed everything. But what is it? What was the reason that Gobekli Tepe was created or built? So if it wasn't a village, what was it? Now, imagine standing in one of the main enclosures at Gobekli Tepe. It's called Enclosure D. Now, just imagine yourself, you're surrounded by a ring of monolithic pillars, each one a stylized human figure. They're T-shaped because the tops of these particular pillars is a head in profile, and the pillar is the body. If you look closely, you can see delicate carvings of arms wrapping around the front and hands pointing towards a lion cloth carved from the stone. These aren't just pillars, they're silent, watchful entities. Perhaps they are images of our ancestors, or some spirits, or even gods. In the center of this circle stand two even larger twin pillars towering over the rest. They seem to be focal point of this entire structure. The sheer effort is staggering. The limestone was quarried from a bedrock shelf over 100 meters away, shaped with flint stools, and moved into this place without wheels or any shows of any burden. How? Well, it implies a social contract of incredible power. The late archaeologist Klaus Schmidt believed Gobekli Tepe was a cathedral on a hill, a central pilgrimage site for hunter-gatherer groups spread across hundreds of kilometers in the land. He imagined them gathering here seasonally, not to live, but to feast and probably perform rituals. The evidence of feasting is overwhelming. Archaeologists have found tens of thousands of wild animal bones of gazelles, boars, along with massive stone troughs that could hold up to 160 liters of liquid. Analysis has shown residues of calcium oxalate, a byproduct of brewing grain. This means they were likely making and consuming large quantities of beer. So picture it. This wasn't just a somber, silent temple. It was a place for a festival, a place where bonds of community were strengthened through shared labor, shared ritual, and of course, shared intoxication. Well, it was a social technology. But what about the rituals about that they were conducting? Well, the art gives us some clues. It's a world of powerful and often dangerous animals. But there are also darker themes. One of the most common motifs that you see on these pillars is a vulture. On some pillars, we see vulture alongside headless human bodies. This has led many researchers to believe the site was a center for perhaps a complex funeral cult, a place where we might call it sky burial, where the dead were laid out to be consumed by vultures, which were seen as sacred creatures that carried the soul to the heavens. So the site could be a gateway, a system for processing the transition between life and death. And what's truly mind bending is that the oldest enclosure are the largest and most technically sophisticated. The younger structures, built centuries later, are smaller and cruder. This completely defies our modern notion of progress. It's as if the original vision, the original spark of genius, faded over time. They didn't start small and get better. They started with a masterpiece and then slowly seemed to forget how they did it. For a long time, Gobekli Tepe seemed like a complete anomaly. But we are now realizing it was just the first piece of a much larger puzzle to be uncovered. I would say that it's like a capital city of a lost world. Now, just 35 kilometers away, another site is emerging from the dust, which is called Karahan Tepe. It's from the same time period and perhaps part of the same culture, but it shows a different flavor. Here, the focus of the art is on the human form. There is a chamber with 11 towering phallus like pillars, all facing a carved human head emerging from the wall. This symbolism is raw, visceral, and speaks to rituals of fertility and perhaps some kind of a shamanic transformation. If we look beyond Turkey, the pattern continues. If we go to the Egyptian Sahara, at a place called Nabta Playa, we find stone circles dating to around 6000 BC. And these are not random. These are precisely aligned to the summer solstice and other key stars. This was a calendar in stone created by a farmer society to perhaps track the seasons. It is applied astronomy thousands of years before the pharaohs of the Egypt. If you go to Pakistan, the site of Mehergarh dates back to 7000 BC. It's a pre-Harappan farming village that existed millennia before we thought urbanization began there. They were practicing dentistry using drills on teeth. They had early forms of metallurgy and long distance trade. This wasn't any primitive backwater. It was a hub of innovation. Now, this culture eventually gave rise to the great Indus Valley cities like Dholavira and Rakhigarhi. These cities had incredible sophisticated urban planning with gridded streets, advanced water reservoirs, and sanitation systems that would not be seen again for thousands of years. And here, the most fascinating part. Despite their size and organization, we find no grand palaces, no opulent royal tombs, and almost no weapons. This suggests a completely different social system, perhaps a more peaceful, cooperative, and distributed form of governance. And this governance wasn't centered on a powerful king. What all these sites hint at is very profound, that human civilization didn't evolve linearly from primitive to advanced. It was a global laboratory of ideas. Our ancestors had sophisticated knowledge systems, deeply intertwined with belief, cosmology, and cooperation. We are not the first to have complex societies. We may just be the most forgetful. There were a lot of other civilizations and cities that were more advanced than the current generation and the current civilization. From my perspective, as a systems thinker, Gobekli Tepe reveals the source code of human behavior. We are so used to thinking that human systems are built on laws, governments, and economic incentives. But this site shows us that humans were capable of incredible, amazing, and large scale cooperation long before any of that existed. What was the system like? Well, it was a system of shared belief run on what I would call symbolic or symbiotic technology. The art, the myths, and the rituals, they weren't just decorations or superstitions. They were functional tools. They were the software that enabled a kind of collection, cognition, a shared mental model of reality that allowed hundreds of people to align their efforts towards a single abstract goal. This implies that belief and meaning are the original operating systems of human behavior, not power, neither economics, but probably cosmology. The story we tell ourselves about who we are and the world around us. I often see a pale echo of this in our corporate world nowadays. We have our modern rituals, the all hands meetings, the quarterly reviews, the new hire onboarding, etc. We have our sacred spaces, the meeting room, the boardroom, the innovation lab, the CEO's office, and corporate hierarchies are not just about power dynamics. They depend on employees having a shared belief in the company's mission, its purpose. But let's be honest, these modern systems often feel hollow. They're designed for efficiency, for productivity, for the bottom line. The ritual spaces of our ancestors were designed not for these things, but for something else entirely, for collective experience, for transcendence. Gobekli Tepe is a silent monument to the idea that meaning is not a byproduct of a system. It is the engine. Meaning is the engine. And I can't help but wonder if the alienation and lack of purpose so many feel in the modern world comes from trying to run our human systems on the wrong operating code. We are running without a meaning, without a purpose. We are led by economy, goals, power, competition, etc. This brings us to the powerful role of myth. And I want to use the Sanskrit term itihasa. Itihasa, which means it happened, or thus indeed it happened. It frames these stories not as a fantasy, but as a form of cultural memory. Almost every culture on earth has a myth about a golden age or a paradise at the beginning of time. In Indian cosmology, it's the Satya Yuga, an age of truth and peace. In Egyptian lore, it's Zep Tepi, or the first time when the gods walked among men. In the Abrahamic traditions, it is, of course, the Garden of Eden. We have been taught to see these as charming fables, as myths. But what if they are something more? What if they are the symbolic, distorted memories of the pre agriculture world? Some anthropologists have called the hunter gatherer lifestyle the original affluent society, arguing that, well, they had more leisure time, less diseases, and their social structures compared to that of the farmers who followed them, they were much better social structures. The transition to agriculture was brutal. It meant harder work, less varied diet, and the rise of diseases and the beginnings of a social hierarchy and, of course, warfare. Would the story of the fall from the Garden of Eden be a collective memory of being expelled from the relative ease of the hunter gatherer world into the back-breaking labor of farming? Could be. If so, then Gopekli Tepe could be the material residue of that forgotten age, of that golden age, Satya Yuga or Zep Tepe. It's a snapshot from the end of that world built by people who still had one foot in that older, more spiritually grounded reality and the other one in the current generation. Myth, in this view, isn't a lie. It's the missing link in the machine of history. It may not tell us exactly what happened, but it tells us powerfully what it felt like. It tells us what people believed was possible. It talks about a meaning. It talks about togetherness. It talks about stories that actually happened. So, why does 1,000-year-old temple, half buried in the Turkish dust, matter to us now? It matters because it humbles us. We are so convinced in our own brilliance, so sure that we stand at the pinnacle of civilization. But Gobekli Tepe suggests that civilization isn't a straight line, but it's like a cycle of ebbs and troughs, a cycle of remembering and forgetting. What if we have forgotten more than we remember? It matters because it forces us to ask uncomfortable questions about our own systems. What wisdom about cooperation did they embody that we have replaced with contracts and litigation? What deep connection to the cosmos did they feel that we have traded for the light polluted skies of our cities? Rediscovering our roots is not about nostalgia, it is about perspective. It's about regaining a sense of depth in a world that is obsessed with ever looking competition and just at the surface level. The builders of Gobekli Tepe had a purpose big enough to move mountains. So I think it's fair to ask, do we have similar purposes? Do we still work for a meaning? Are we still living for a meaning as a society and as a community? The story of Gobekli Tepe is still being written. With only 5% of the site excavated, the greatest discoveries may still lie beneath the soil. But what we already know has changed everything. It teaches us that the human need to understand our place in the universe is one of the oldest and most powerful driver of all. Why are we here? What is our purpose? What is our meaning? If today's journey sparked a thought or stirred a question, I invite you to sit with it. Because that's how all human systems began, with questions that reached beyond the visible horizon and the audacity to build an answer. Thanks for listening to Roots and Realities. If you liked today's topic, please subscribe, share, and join me next time as we continue on this journey to unlock the histories, systems, and society that shape our world, one layer at a time. Thank you.